This meeting is being live streamed. Well, I will start. The last Sunday, you had the first session on operations management by Dr. Rekha, and she gave an overview of what it is. Now we will go into a little more depth, but this being a basic course on operations management, we will not be getting into too much of details on each one of them as the aspects of operations management. But at the end of today, you should be able to clearly say that what is operations management and what you are expected to do in operations management. Okay. So I will straight away take, because it's a fairly long session which I have to pack up in about 2 hours. So yes, somebody was, yes, Purva, right. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now, all of you keep your muted. You can keep your video on if you have enough bandwidth, or you need not. Okay, that is up to you. But keep the voice muted, because there will be a lot of noise otherwise. Okay, while we are, so we have thing. So a brief overview of what we did last time, but I'll just go through it again. What is operations management? It's a function which is responsible for planning, coordinating, and controlling the resources which needed to produce products and services for a company. Now, what do you understand by resources? What are resources? The 4 M's we say, the man, machine, materials, methods, those are resources. They are used to produce from an input by a process to get a desired output. Generally, what does an organization or a company desires? That an output is produced efficiently with the least resources and the least wastage. So operations management implies efficiency. Now, I'm not saying that the other functions do not, but more so, because in operations management is the only place where you can save and give more surplus or more profits to the organization. Well, let me be a little clear in that. See, what does a marketing do? They sell the product. Now, the price of the product is fixed by the competition and the market forces which are there. So you cannot do much about the prices, especially in a competitive market. Whereas in operations, the product which is produced, you can have many ways of producing it by lowering the cost and increasing or improving quality. So basically, it is a very important function, and more so, even when you say products means products and services, because today we are in many of the function. Many of you may be working in services companies, like including maybe hospitals or hospitality, or in banks and insurance and many other places. Operations are involved in any of these because you need to convert something to an end product, an input to an output. So primarily, an operations management is a management function. It is a core function of the organization because that is the place where you are realizing the product. I wouldn't say create because you don't create a product. I would say realize the product from the various inputs which are needed to create that particular product. In every organization, whether it is service or manufacturing, it applies to any organization, whether it is profit or even not for profit. Even for an NGO, as we say, non-governmental organization, which is a not-for-profit organization. Now, typically, an organization chart, of course, there can be many ways of having an organization chart, but a simple organization chart like this, there is a CEO for the company, and then there are many functions. Of course, you may say that, yes, we have the main ones are the marketing, the operations, and finance. There can be other functions like the HR, depending upon the size of the organization. There can be systems or management information systems or systems, as you may call, and maybe many other things depending upon the particular need of the particular organization. But the main things are marketing, because without marketing, you cannot reach the product or service to the customer. Operations, to realize the product from the given inputs to a desired output, which is required by the customer. And for doing both, you need money, which is the finance. So these three are major. Marketing manages the customer demands, generates sales and for goods and services. Operations manages the people, equipment, technology, materials, and information to produce goods and or services. And finance manages cash flow, the current assets, and capital investments. And of course, compliances, which are a part of today's ecosystem. So what is the role of an operations management? Basically, operations management transforms, as we said, inputs to outputs. Inputs are resources such as people, material, and money. And of course, there is also methods which we can add to that. And outputs are goods and services. Now, the transformation process for this is, in fact, even ISO 9000 defines the process as input, process, output, as simple as that. Now, within the process, there are many sub-processes. Each one has an input, process, output. So basically, an operations management involves, right here, as you see, the transformation process, to which there are inputs, manpower in the form of human resources, facilities in the form of factories, the infrastructure, the power, the water, the compressed, whatever, air, gases, whatever that may be required for the particular process. Like in the case of services, it could be computers, it could be servers, it could be many other equipment which may be required, and processes which are defined as to how things happen, how things happen and should happen, which are clearly defined, and people are trained to do those processes. The technologies which are used for converting the input to output, and last but not the least, the materials And materials can be the raw materials, it can be consumables, it can be spares, accessories, everything, whatever, all of them come under materials. Now, with all these inputs, which are used to transform into a desired output in the form of either goods or services, and in many cases, goods and services. It doesn't mean that it doesn't, there are many places where you have goods and services. Like for information, you go to a restaurant. Now, what you get is the food, but along with that, you get a lot of service. The person to take your order, to bring it, to clean your table, all that is in the form of services. So the outputs can be goods. If you are going and buying something off the shelf of a retail, it's just the goods. But in many cases, it can be only services, like in case of a banking or an insurance, or it can be a combination of goods and services, like in many cases. Now, the improvement, there is a constant feedback which happens from the output to the input, which is to be used to improve the transformation process to give a better output, and a control system for monitoring the transformation process to improve the quality of the output. So there are two feedbacks, one an external feedback from the customer, and then there is an internal feedback which is in the form of information or MIS or whatever you call, right there. So the operation management's transformation role. What is transformation? When you add a value to the input, then to get the desired output. So increase the product value at each stage. Why do people pay you? What do they pay you for? For the value of for the value they receive from the product. And operations management is what creates that value. So you add value to increase the product value at each stage. Value added is the net increase between the output and the product value and the input material value. Like, let's say cars. For cars, you need steel, one of the things, but you can't give the steel unless it is transformed into the chassis, body, and many parts which are there. It doesn't add value. So the end product has the value increase from the input product for consumption by the end user. Now, you must have heard of, before I go further, you must have heard of B2B and B2C. It's a simple thing. B2B is business to business, and B2C is business to customer. Like I just told you about a car. A car is sold to a customer through a distributor. So it is a B2C operation. But whereas in a car, let us say there is an engine. Now, a manufacturer of an engine doesn't sell the engine directly to the customer. He has to sell it to the car manufacturer, who in turn uses that engine in the car which he is manufacturing. So that is a B2B. Whereas a car being sold to a customer is a B2C. There is value added at every stage of manufacture. Typically, in all manufacturing, there are 4 tiers, as we call, of manufacturing, from basic material to components to sub-assemblies to the finished product. And in each stage, there is a value which is added. You can think of any product, you will find that there will be at least 2, 3, or 4 stages of manufacturing. It provides an efficient transformation. We used this term earlier also. Efficiency means performing activities with the least possible cost. See, a person can incur a lot of expense to make something, or use a lot of time. Time is also a cost, right? If in a 8-hour shift, if somebody can make 100 and the other person can make only 80, obviously the efficiency of the person making 80 is lower, or the productivity of a person making 80 is lower. So transformation means productivity. Transformation or the operations means efficiency. It also means quality, which will come at maybe at a later stage, we will understand that it is, all these are interconnected. Quality, productivity, efficiency, all these are interconnected. Now, operations management is required for both manufacturing and service organization. Difference being, in services, it is an intangible product, the product which you don't see, whereas in a manufacturing, you see a tangible product. In services, the product cannot be inventoried. What do you mean by inventory? Well, let's say you buy a bar of soap from a shop. Now, you don't consume the soap immediately in the shop. You bring it home, keep it in your stores or wherever in the bathroom. When your old soap is over, then you open the new one and use it. Let us say from the manufacturer of the soap till it reaches you, it has passed through many levels of being inventoried at the distributor level, at the retail level, at the shop level, and before it reaches you. Services, on the contrary, like let us say a simple services as your telephone or your mobile, there is no inventory there. You are consuming the service immediately at the point and at the time when you need it. It cannot be spinning. You can store the conversation, but the fact that the conversation is happening on real time, you use the word real time there. So the product cannot be inventoried, whereas in manufacturing product, the product is inventoried. There is in services, there is a high customer contact, like we talked about banking, insurance, telecom, wherever there is a contact with the direct customer. Whereas in a manufacturing product, like you do not know, let's say, who is working in a Maruti factory for the car which you buy ultimately, right? So there is a short response time in services, there is a longer response time. The services are lot more labor intensive. Whereas manufacturing, you need capital intensive, in the sense that you need a factory, you need machines, you need power, many other things for it to be produced. So this is primarily the difference between manufacturing and services. Similarities, if you see, both use technology. Today, of course, whether you make pins or aeroplanes, you need technology. Whether you have whatever types of services which you offer, you need technology. Both have quality, productivity, and response issues. Both must forecast demand. Obviously, none of this is like we talked about a car. Nobody is going to make only a single car for you. They have to be planned, and they have to be different models are planned and planned long before it can be come to the distributor or the retailer from where the customer has to buy. So they have to, but they do not know how much to produce, so they need to have an intelligent way of forecasting the demand. Both have capacity, layout, and location issues. Where it has to be produced, from where, how much to produce based on capacity, and what technology which you use to produce, which will determine the layout. Both have customers, suppliers, scheduling, and staffing issues. Without a customer, there is no business. Obviously, whether it is products or services, there is an input in the form of raw materials in case of manufactured goods, and many other resources to be supplied in case of services. They have to be scheduled as to how much and when to be produced or realized to be consumed by the consumer, and they all need manpower. So these are the similarities. So in today's operations management environment, we all know that, even you, when you know that one let us say the Vodafone is not good, you will switch over to, let's say, Airtel, or you will switch over to Jio. A customer is not wedded to any one particular brand, as you can say. The moment you find that there is a better product or a better service, the customers are willing to switch over. So the customers demand better quality, so you can retain the customer only when you're able to consistently deliver better quality, not once, but consistently. So better quality, greater speed, and at lower costs, because now everywhere, wherever you see, the costs are coming down. You see, the prices are coming down in most of the cases, right? Companies implementing lean system concepts, a total systems approach to efficient organization, because they no longer can optimize only certain things. They will have to look at the total system to ensure that they provide the services at lower costs and better prices. Recognize need to better manage information using enterprise resource planning and customer relations management systems, ERP and CRM systems. Increased cross-functional decision making, which probably you will see sometime during the course. In doing these operations, there is a constant information flow from the various departments, as you can call it, or divisions or services within the organization, typically consisting of marketing, finance, human resources, engineering, information systems, or IT, as you may call, and accounting. So you see that all of them take information and supply information to operations management continuously. Like in case of, let's say, starting with marketing. The marketing is the one which supplies information on what kind of forecasts for what products and product mix to be produced, what are the customer demands, what are the customer feedbacks, what are the needs for the new products to be introduced or new models to be introduced, what are all the current operating capabilities, inventory levels to be maintained, because some products may be seasonal and you may expect a sudden spurt in demand during certain periods for which inventory levels have to be shored up. The output rates, increase in capacities based on long-term forecasts. The finance obviously has to ensure that the capital investments are properly planned and provided for. The budgets are made, and more important actually is the cash flow, which is there. So the accounting takes care of right from the raw material to getting and processing the monies received from sales. So engineering takes care of the design as well as the operations capabilities or layouts, etc. And most important is again the human resources, which need to provide the required skills, the right person for the right job at every level in the organization to ensure there's smooth conversion or transformation of the material to output. Okay. So far, whatever we have talked, the highlights are that the operations management is a business function that is responsible for managing and coordinating the resources needed to produce a company's products and services. The role of operations management is to transform organizational inputs into companies' products and services to outputs. It's responsible for a wide range of decisions, ranging from strategic to tactical. We have not seen this earlier, but operations should management is not only doing the day-to-day function, but then they'll have to plan for medium term in terms of the year, and also the long term in terms of the capacities which you need to do, and also any changes in technology, technological changes have to be foreseen to ensure that they are implemented. Organizations can be divided into manufacturing and service organization, depending upon tangible or intangible products. The operations management has gone through many stages over, let's say, the early 1900s to what we see today. Starting from the Industrial Revolution to the scientific management, to which you might have studied earlier in Basic 101, the human relations movement and the management science approach, and today everything being computerized or the IT revolution. But of course, you must have also heard of the Internet of Things or IoT managed productions, productions using robotics, productions manufacturing using artificial intelligence, using AI, ML, a whole lot of new methodologies in operations management. OM is a highly important function in today's dynamic business environment. As I say, there is the only place where there is an effective, efficient, productive transformation of the input to output. Among the trends with significant impact are just-in-time management, total quality management, business process re-engineering, flexibility in time-based thing, supply chain management, and last but not the least, from the last many years now, that it is mandated that environmental issues are taken care of. In fact, the United Nations have mandated 17 sustainable development goals, many of them which impact operations management. So if you see, even in ISO, we have ISO 14,000, which is for environmental issues, related issues, and it is all good companies ensure that they follow practices related to environmental issues. So operations management works closely with all the business functions, as we saw in the earlier slide, the linkages between all the departments. The first and most important thing for operations is forecasting. Unless you are able to forecast what would be the demand, both in the short term, medium term, and the long term, you cannot plan your capacity, you cannot plan your location, you cannot plan your layout, you cannot plan your technology of production. To do all this, you need to forecast. So the focus of how much to produce, what product mix to produce, when to produce, how much to be inventoried at different stages of production, all these need to be determined before you start realizing the product. Focus impact not only other business functions. So obviously, right from marketing to finance and manpower, HR, everybody will be involved in this process. Operation managers make many forecasts such as expected demand for the company's products. These forecasts are then used to determine product design that are expected to sell, the quantity of product that needs to be produced, the amount that are needed for supplies and materials. Forecasting within operations management, a company uses forecast to determine future requirements of space. As you said, maybe if your forecast increases, you may need more space, more different layouts, etc. The capacity, the location needs, and the amount of labor that is needed. We talked about all this. Forecast drives strategic operation decisions such as choice of competitive priorities, changes in processes, because technologies can also change, and the scale of operations may change based on the technologies what you use to produce. So forecast decisions serve as the basis for tactical planning, developing worker schedules, etc. Virtually all operations management decisions are based on forecast of the future. So forecasting is one of the most important functions in operations management, and it is all the first function before you start most of the decisions for product realization or operations. Forecasting across organizations, forecasting is critical to management of all organizational functional areas. Marketing relies on forecasting to predict demand and future sales. From there only the whole thing starts. Finance focus based on, of course, if you are a listed company, large company, based on the stock prices, financial performance, capital investment needs. Information systems provides ability to share databases and information. Human resources forecast future hiring requirements. Like if you see like companies like Infosys and all that, because they have very large requirements of manpower, they keep on taking manpower, train them, keep them, you must have heard of, keep them, bench them, and then use them when and wherever they need. But all organizations cannot afford to do that. So they'll have to forecast the future and ensure that there is a constant pipeline of people available for operations. The three basic principles of forecasting are: focus are rarely perfect, obviously, that is why it's called a forecast, are more accurate for groups than individual items. And usually what happens is you can forecast approximately at the gross level, but when it comes to individual levels, you may have to constantly keep changing your operations to deliver different types of goods and services as and when it is needed. and are more accurate in the shorter term than longer time horizons. Forecasting involves 5 steps: decide what to forecast, evaluate and analyze the data. Usually you take the past data, but you also scan the environment, look at the trends of what is happening across in the market as well as in the environment across the world, whatever, everything affects today. Select and test the model which you are using for forecasting, generate the forecast and monitor what is the accuracy, and then refine the process again on the model. Forecasting methods can be classified into qualitative and quantitative. Of course, qualitative methods are based on subjective opinion of the forecaster, and quantitative methods. Today, more and more forecasting is on quantitative methods. In fact, if you see that analytical sciences and analytical management is gaining more and more importance and opportunities in the marketplace also. There are time, I'll not go too much into this slide. It is more, there are different types of forecasting, and anyway, for this particular course, this is not needed. Then you have forecast errors. Again, as I said, for this course, that may not be very relevant. Once the forecast is done, the next important thing is to plan. What do you plan? You plan, first of all, to start with, you plan the capacity. Do you have sufficient capacity to produce what you need to produce? Capacity planning capacity is the upper limit or ceiling on the load that the operating unit can handle. Obviously, when you talk about this is the maximum capacity, you cannot produce more than that. Or if you try to produce, the system gets overheated and then you may it may fail. So that is the upper limit. The basic question in capacity handling are what kind of capacity is needed, how much is needed, and when it is needed. Some of the capacity, the needs for capacity can be linear throughout the year. It can be seasonal. Like especially in case of food products, you'll find that you don't get an item like, let's say, a coconut probably may be available throughout the year, or a banana may be available throughout the year. But then suppose you are in the business of, let us say, making mango based products like fruity. Either you'll have to process the mango during the season of mango and keep it for producing throughout the year, or you have to produce and store the finished goods or the semi-finished goods for use throughout the year. Similarly, for any product which is seasonal, cyclical, sporadic, your planning will depend upon how customers need, when they need, and where they need. So the capacity decisions are important because it impacts the ability to meet future demands. Suppose there is a sudden spurt of demand, like if you've seen during the COVID period, the demand for oxygen was very high. Everybody was suddenly blaming this government, that government, this hospital, all that. But the fact that demand, either there should have been a model to predict the demand, or there should be a way of able to meet the demand. Now, there is always a lag between the two, because you're not done the prediction of the demand, or you're not able to produce or create facility to produce that demand, as we talked about this case of oxygen, which was needed especially during the second phase of COVID. So the capacity decisions, but now we have enough capacity. If suppose there is a certain spurt in whatever, God forbid, happens, yes, we are able to meet. So impacts the ability to meet future demands, affects the operating costs. Major determinant of the initial cost, involves long-term commitment, affects competitiveness, and affects ease of management. So capacity decisions are very important. You cannot have a lower capacity and then get overheated. You cannot have such a large capacity, because your overheads and fixed costs will be so high to maintain that it will be no longer viable. So the capacity should be optimum to meet the demand, the current and maybe an immediate future demand. The capacity or output is also determined by the facilities, the layout of the facilities, products and services, the product mixes, and setups time which are needed to produce those products, processes which also determine the quality, human considerations determined by the motivation level of the people who work, the operations. Like if I'm talking about motivation to work, I'm immediately reminded of the episode where the Taj Hotel in Bombay, where Mumbai, during that terrorist strike, the motivation level was so high that none of the employees left the hotel in spite of their own personal danger. Now, many organizations provide motivation levels where the employees are willing to work extra to deliver products or services to the customer. Operations means which requires scheduling and synchronizing and taking care of various problems which may occur. Supply chain, to ensure that there are no material shortages, and taking care of the external forces so that meet with all the regulations which will impact the organization. In operations, there is usually a decision which is taken for make or buy. Initially, a lot of big organizations were under the impression, I'm saying this specifically from what I have seen by one of the companies called the Indian Telephone Industries, which used to be one of those very old companies which used to make those old model telephones. They thought that when they want to make telephones, they have to make everything right from the smallest component which goes into making the telephone to everything. The danger, of course, today nobody does that. The danger in that is when technology changes, your product itself may undergo a total, either the product may die and a new product may come. The new product may require newer technologies. So it is no longer today, no product is made from, we talked about the 4 layers, tier 1 to tier 4. Each one outsources it to somebody else to do, who has an expertise in that particular technology. So the key to operations and key to manufacturing today is outsourcing, which involves the make or buy decision. Outsourcing is obtaining a goods or services from an external provider who is an expert in that particular technology. Decide on outsourcing by considering the available capacity, That's where the vendor or a vendor development comes in to the picture. You need to ensure that the person who is whom you're outsourcing to has the expertise, has a capacity, takes good care of the quality during the process of realizing that particular product, has a stability in production, keeps the cost low, and do not lose control over his own operations. So these are all the key elements in. When it comes to service capacity, see, services are we told in the very first or a second slide that service cannot be inventory. You cannot store services. Services are to be delivered at the point at which the customer is there. Right? You cannot make, let us say, a dosa some 20 kilometers away and bring it and serve here, unless, of course, it is partly processed and finished and served, that kind of thing, or it is stored in a hot case and then served to you, which becomes very expensive. So the need for the service is to be nearer to the customer. Capacity and location are closely tied here. At the point of consumption, that is where the services need to be provided. Inability to store services, that we said it cannot be inventory. Capacity must match the demand that is needed. Suppose, let us say during lunchtime, there is a demand for, let's say, 100 customers. All these 100 need at the almost around the same time, between 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 maximum. Whereas if you're not able to provide it, they will go somewhere else. So your capacity should be able to meet the demand, and especially the peak demand. Or you have to take a decision how much of the demand you will forego and meet only that much demand. Degree of volatility of demand, that is, as we talked about in peak, whether you are going to meet the peak demand or you're able to forego some of the peak demand and deliver only that much. Another concept in operations management is what we call as a break even. Been telling all along that the moment you talk about operations, it means that it is a cost. Operations means cost. The moment you talk about cost, how much you are able to save comes into the picture. Now, beyond a certain particular point, you cannot save costs. You can only realize a profit after you have produced a certain minimum quantity or volume of product. And that is what we call as a break even, or break even quantity, or break even level. The level of production that equates total cost to total revenues. When the total cost, revenue is what the money you get from sales, cost is what you incur to produce a product. When both are same, then that level of production is break even. Anything more than that quantity, you will start getting profits for the organization. Because, of course, there is a concept of fixed cost and a variable cost. We will not get into it at this time, right? Fixed costs are those which are there irrespective of the level of production. Like in terms of most of the fixed costs are the plant cost, the capital cost, the in a way, the good part of power, the good part of manpower today, because you don't pay them by the number of products which you produce. So there are many costs which are fixed and only very few of them are there. Whereas the material cost is a variable cost, a very simple thing. So once you have reached a level of break even, then the profits which you make, the difference between the sale price and the variable cost, that becomes a profit to an organization. Okay. Then we come to the planning and the planning horizon. See, we talked about planning in a general sense earlier. You need to have an aggregate planning at least for a year in any organization. And planning horizons, intermediate planning horizons in organizations covers anywhere between 2 months to 12 months. In fact, in one of the organizations where I was working, we will always plan for the month at the beginning of the month and +1 and sometimes even +2. And keep revising these plans at the end of every month again. So now to, let us say, 1 or 2 months is the short range of planning. And for the year is an intermediate range. And anything above the year to say, let us say 2 years, 3 years, maximum, let us say 5 years, nobody can see beyond that, is a long range planning. Long range planning affects decisions which need to be taken for the capacity, the locations, and developing bigger vendors or things like that. Whereas immediate range impacts your supply chain management mostly and distribution and marketing. So short range plans are usually detailed plans which impact the machine loading, that is your operations, and assigning people to the jobs. Intermediate plans determines how much manpower you will forecast for or get, and what output levels you are planning in your production. Long range plans, as I told you, is only for capacity planning in the not immediate but a long-term future, and locations and layouts. You may add a factory here and add a facility there, add a branch here, have an outlet somewhere else. All that is impacted by long range plans. The planning sequence usually starts from, for operations, starts from a business plan. Usually what happens, any organization has a plan for at least for the year concerned. From this plan, which is usually discussed at the top management level, is then broken down into aggregate planning in terms of the product mix that is needed to be produced, when to be produced, and the quantities for each one of those different types which it needed to be produced. So business plan usually comes from corporate strategies, economic and from the competition, what is the markets which are there, what are the political conditions. Like today, the COVID problem, COVID is not only a problem for somebody, but is also an opportunity for somebody else. Because I know a friend of mine who is in the business of cleaning chemicals and all that. No, he had a booster demand from the last 2 years. Hospitals had great demands, right? But some products and some services did not do anywhere near what it had forecasted. So you have the business plan, and from there an aggregate plan, and from there we call it as a master schedule, which is a detailed level of planning of what is to be produced for specific products within the aggregate planning. These are the three basic levels of planning when it comes to operations management. From aggregate planning, there's a process called disaggregation, breaking it into different product groups and other details. And then from there, what is called a master schedule is produced. Now, all these you will study when you get into the operations management as an elective. But I'm just giving you the words which possibly you may be able to correlate or look for yourself. So the input for the master scheduling is what is the inventory you have on hand, what is the forecast, what are the customer orders which you have received. So with these three inputs, you schedule your production for the immediate +1 +2 months. And from there, the projected inventory, the master production schedule comes out, and what uncommitted inventories you may land up with. Now, the moment you talk of inventories, there are three words which you need to understand when it comes, because it's an operations basics program. First is the raw materials. We call it RM. Okay. RM can be in the form of a material, or it can be a part or a component, as we can call. You can also call raw material or component, or raw material or purchased parts, as you can see here. Then partially completed goods, which are inside the premises of product, the factory or the premises, they are called the work in process or WIP. These are inventoried between the processes of manufacturing, which are used as buffers in production or waiting for it to be taken to the next stage of production, or wherever there is a batch processes waiting for that batch to be ready for processing. Then we have finished good inventories, that once the goods are completed, then it is stored either in the factory, or it is transported to the channel partner, which can be distributor, it can be then to the retail stores. They are at various levels, which are finished goods inventory, or FG, we call it. So inventories can also be the replacement parts which are needed, tools which are required in production, and supplies like cooling oil. It can be compressed gas which are needed. Many other things which may be needed during the process of manufacturing. Inventories are also in the form of goods in transit to warehouses and to customers, because the total chain till it reaches the customer is all inventory. Functions of inventory: to meet an anticipated demand, because that creates a buffer; to smoothen production requirements; to decouple operations, because like in an operation, from one process it goes to the next process. If there is a gap, then everybody is waiting. The waiting line happens. So in order to make sure that the other person is not waiting, if you have some inventory between the operations 1 and say later 2, then it decouples the operations, that thing, to protect stockouts at various levels. Functions of inventory is to take advantage of order cycles, to help price increases, to permit operations, and to take advantage of quantity discounts. This is mostly for finished goods, which we say. Objectives of inventory control: to achieve satisfactory levels of customer service while keeping inventory costs within reasonable bounds. The levels of customer service There is also a concept of cost of ordering and cost of inventory. The cost of ordering is that, if you're ordering small quantities, there is a process for ordering, placing the order, getting the shipment from there, receiving it at the stores, inspecting what is the material which you have received, take it to for production. Now there are various stages. If it is too large a quantity, then your inventory increases and your cost increases. If it is too small a quantity, the cost of ordering and getting it inside, that increases. So there is a concept which we talk in terms of things called an economic order quantity, or what we call as a EOQ. So the moment you talk about inventory and ordering, there is what is concept called as economic order quantity. Even when you buy for your own house, you don't buy, let's say, your requirement of rice every day. Correct. You may buy vegetables for your day-to-day requirement, but you don't buy many of the items which are available, which can be stored. You don't buy also, let's say, 100 kgs of rice. You may buy maybe 5 kgs at a time, which is probably sufficient for, let's say, a month. But there are many other items which you buy for a week's requirement, or sometimes like items like milk and other things which you buy for your daily requirement. So the inventory, even in an organization, will depend upon what type of items which you buy, and they are also classified in different ways. Of course, there are different ways of classifying inventory. It could be what we can say, or A, B, C types of classification, VED, vital, essential, desirable kind of thing. It could be XYZ kind of thing. There are many ways of determining the inventory. So the inventory management is what is needed in any organization, because that is the only thing which determines a smooth, uninterrupted, trouble-free, continuous operation of the processes. So a system to keep track of inventory, the inventories may be there not only inside your factory, but then it can be in process. It may be lying with the godown of the supplier, waiting for it to be shipped, right? Or in many cases, when you're tracking supply chain management, it could be in the process of manufacture from your supplier. So there has to be a system to keep track of the inventory, a reliable forecast of demand, knowledge of lead times, reasonable estimates of what are the holding costs, ordering costs, and shortage costs. All these three are important. Holding cost in the sense that suppose you have a very bulky item, obviously you need a lot of space. You may not have space in your own premises, then you'll have to store it somewhere outside. Then every time you want to get, then you incur costs for transportation of that. You need manpower, you need the logistics to do that. We already talked about ordering costs. If your ordering quantities are too small, then too frequent ordering will increase the ordering costs. And yeah, okay. And shortage costs. What is the concept of shortage costs is sometimes even a C-class item, nuts and bolts, not available, can stop your entire production. Obviously, when the production is stopped, you are incurring all costs, all the fixed costs, but you're not able to manufacture or realize the output. So that entire cost, the cost of maybe a small part, you may incur sometimes 100 times, 1,000 times the cost by not having that. So that is what is called as the shortage cost. Shortage could be even in terms of electricity cuts. Why do organizations have generating sets? But then not necessarily, I may not have the full capacity. Suppose, let us say I have 100 kilowatt power. I may have only about, let's say, 40 kilowatt of generator, because it is not necessary that when the power cut happens, I need all the 100 kilowatt. There are certain processes which I cannot stop, and that may be only a requirement of 40 kilowatt. So you need to plan that kind of a thing. Then inventory management also implies a classification system. I already told you about that ABC classification: A class, B class, C class. C class doesn't mean that it is not important. It is just that if the unit cost of that particular product is very low, but the shortage cost is very high, I would rather keep some excess items or buffer stocks of those C class items always in, so that I never run out of that. Similarly, I talked about VED. That is another way of looking at vital, essential, desirable kind of classification of inventory. Now we come to the planning, which we call as a material resource planning, manufacturing requirements planning. The inputs for that is the master schedule, the bill of material. What do you understand by bill of material? Let us say I'm producing, let us say, this pen. Okay. Now, what does this pen consist of? The pen consists of the refill, first of all. There is a body, there's a top, there is a bottom portion, there is a top portion, there is a clip here, then there is a refill, right? Now, let us say these are the 4 parts which are there. Now, how much of each one of them are needed to produce one pen? The 4 items and the number of items that are needed to produce that one pen is what is the bill of material for producing one item. So let us say I am going to produce 100 pens today. So my bill of material should be that I need one of this. Now this particular, let's say, contains 3 refills. So for one pen, I need 3 refills. I need a bottom, I need a top, I need a clip. Okay. A very simple product, but there are products like, let's say, cars or mobiles needs hundreds and hundreds of items, and some of them are required more than one. Some of them may be in tens, some of them may be like, if there is a printed circuit board with various components, different types of resistors, different types of capacitors, different types of various other components. So that is what is called as the bill of material. So to produce a certain given quantity for that particular day, that much bill of material should be there. Now to produce, let us say, for that particular week, then that multiplied by that much should be there. If different products mix is to be produced, then for bill of material for each one of those product mix should be available. Now the complication happens is when how much of these bill of materials are in stock and how often will you get and what is the lead time that is needed for you to get those materials. That will again determine the inventory which you will have to ensure that there is a production takes place without any stoppages. So manufacturing resource planning inputs are the master schedule, the bill of material, and what inventory of each one of them you have. From there, you do the processing to release what we call the internal orders for manufacturing. When you say there, MRP outputs or the order releases, that doesn't mean the order to the customer. It is for the shop floor orders. They are released based on the availability of all this, so that now it is pakka that to produce this you have all these materials. Materials are allocated, assigned, and delivered to the point of production. Okay, so you keep updating the inventories, generate performance reports, right, and all this. So this in together is called material resource planning. The inputs are the master production schedule, as we say, states which end items are to be produced, when they are needed, and in what quantities. Bill of materials is the list of all the raw materials, parts, and sub-assemblies needed to produce one unit of the product. As I said, give you the example of the pen. Inventory records includes information on the status of the item during the planning horizon, which is the quantity, supplier, order lead time, lot sizes. The master schedule, which is one of the three primary inputs in the MRP, states which end items are to be produced, when they are needed, and in what quantities. Cumulative lead time. You must understand the concept of lead time there. What do you mean by a lead time? Lead time is the time you can call on an average needed for starting to end, right? From starting a process to the end of the process. What is a lead time? That is the terminology which is used is a lead time. The sum of lead times that sequential phases of a process require, from ordering of parts or raw materials to completion of the final assembly. That is the total lead time for manufacturing. Could be within the 8-hour shift, or sometimes it can be more than that, depending upon what are the processes which are there from starting to end. Just a simple example given here. The procurement of parts, let's say, takes 2, 3, 4, this much. Fabrication of the parts take this much time. The sub-assemblies take this much time, and the assembly takes this much time. So the total lead time is 10 minus, say, 9. 9 units of time are required for completion from the procurement to the final assembly. Now, the marketing cannot, suppose this is the lead time and you have a total shortage of material. The sales or marketing cannot say that, I'll give you tomorrow. Let's say each one is a day. Let's assume that each one of these is a day. That means you need a minimum of 9 days from procurement to completion for you to deliver. Now, you cannot shorten this because each process happens only after the previous one is finished. So this is the minimum time that is needed. No, you cannot say that I can do it in 2 days. No, it's not possible. So that is what is the concept of a lead time. Bill of materials, which we saw earlier, one of the 3 primary inputs for the MRP, a listing of all the raw materials, parts, sub-assemblies, and assemblies needed to produce one unit. Product structure tree. Of course, this is a visual depiction of the requirements of a bill of material where all components are listed. You can make it into a kind of a chart, or you can in an Excel sheet, or you can make it in a tree diagram kind of thing to say that what happens from one process to the other and where that particular material or a component enters in the process of the product realization. Next, we have the manufacturing resources planning, or the MRP 2. It is called as the MRP 2. Involves the whole production process, starting with the aggregate planning, then the master production schedule, and finally the MRP. These together is called as the manufacturing resource planning 2. Now, earlier, whatever we did was only relating to the production. Now, you need to integrate this with the requirement of finances for doing this, inputs from the marketing as to how much and when is needed, and also how they will handle the end product once it is realized, engineering to create the layout, make changes in the production line, creating jigs and fixtures and many other things which are required for producing, purchasing to ensure that the bill of material right up to the last level of detail is made available to you as and when you need it. The manufacturing itself is what you are doing if you are in operations, and the manpower or the HR department which supplies the required manpower at different points, different times, different stages of manufacturing, especially the type of skills manpower that are required at each stage. So this whole process of integration with the MRP1, as we saw earlier, is what is called as the MRP2. Given pictorially, from market demand, there is a production planning, there is a rough cut planning, and that in turn goes to master production schedule, to MRP capacity planning, and then goes back to adjusting the master production schedule. This is in any process is a cyclical process, and then feedback based on at each stage based on the supply demand requirement from marketing. Now, in this entire planning process, today you must have be hearing of, let us say, a company like SAP. How many of you do you know what is SAP? You can switch on your videos and raise your hands. Prachi. Ratishta. Hi, Anshaj. Seeing you after a long time, man. You're from a manufacturing background. What is SAP? Mute. Unmute.
It's a term used in data processing.
Yeah, SAP is a company actually. It is an enterprise ERP solutions company. See, basically, I would say about, let's say 30, 40 years back in India, we were only having softwares which were helping in calculating, let's say, payrolls, accounting, some of the very mundane things. Today, we have an integrated package of managing the entire resources which an enterprise handles and put together. They are called as the enterprise resource planning, and they are integrated. Of course, many organizations may be using only some of the subsystems, but larger organizations, they have an integrated enterprise resource planning. The integration of financial, manufacturing, and human resources, all in a single computers. Forget about even manufacturing organization. Most hospitals today, especially corporate hospitals, they are fully connected right from the admission to handling the patients, handling the schedules for everything everything is automated. Automation using computers in planning all the resources which the enterprise uses is enterprise resource planning or ERP in short. So integration of financial, manufacturing, and human resources by a single computerized system. It doesn't mean by one computer, there are many computers, but then a computerized system, server-based computerized system, which handles everything from end to end, is an enterprise resource planning system. Represents expanded effort to integrate standardized record keeping using one database that will permit information sharing among different areas of an organization to manage systems more efficiently. It not only keeps the data, but also processes the data in many cases, like in case of inventory planning, in many other finances, especially, everywhere else, providing certain forecasts also. So that is ERP. Today, we hear of this word called supply chain. What do you understand by supply chain? Till not too far, many organizations, more so manufacturing organizations, did not realize that their product or offering and ability to produce and deliver depends upon not only the immediate vendor which supplies to the organization, but the vendor's vendor and the quality of the materials of the vendor's vendor, and going backward again is important. So basically, then it started looking at, even importantly so, when the materials are processed and ready for delivery, you also need a chain to ensure that the product reaches the customer as fast as possible, safely. So, like today we see, like we have Amazon Prime. In fact, yesterday I ordered something in Amazon Prime. This time I already received it by 2 o'clock. Sitting in Mysore, small city in Karnataka. Now you can have that happening anywhere in India today, because the supply chain and logistics have become so strong, especially in the last 10 years, or less than 10 years. In fact, it all started with that one of the companies called Delivery, Sahil Barua is now there going for an IPO. Of course, that Amazon as a company, then Flipkart, which is now acquired by Walmart, and then of course our own Indian system is coming up fast by Nandan Nilekani. So there is a huge change which has happened in the last 10-20 years on what we call as a supply chain. Nothing but a supplier to a customer's customer is the end of supply chain. And if each of the links is very strong, then the end result of what you get, a product or service, in terms of quality, cost, and delivery, QCD, quality, cost, delivery, will be the best quality at the lowest cost, the fastest delivery. Today, nobody has the patience to wait. You order something, you want it now, right? This is possible only when you have a very strong supply chain, right up to the basic materials, to the next stage. So like we talked about 4 stages of manufacturing. It's only metaphorical, but it could be, as I said, it can be 2, it can be 3, it can be 4, it can be much more than that also. So at every level, the quality, cost, delivery is maintained. Then you, in an intermediate process, somewhere in between, you are also able to deliver quality, cost, and delivery to the next stage, which finally reaches the customer after maybe 2 or 3 different processes, stages of distribution, logistics, whatever, channels. So the network of external suppliers, internal processes, and external distributors, and the links connecting them that delivered a finished product or service to the customer is supply chain. See, here the word used is external suppliers, not the supplier. That supplier will have his own supplier, and that supplier may have another supplier supplying a raw material to that, who makes a component, supplies a subassembly, which supplies the subassembly to you to make the finished product, give it to a distributor who may be different from your organization, who then sells it to a retailer, which may be a different organization, which then reaches a point of sale and then to the customer. You are the internal process. You have external suppliers, and you in turn have external distributors. Today, the concept of supply chain is to make QCD, quality, cost, delivery, strong at every level, right from the first stage to the last stage, which reaches the customer. The products and services which are needed. That is the cost of the supply chain. Pictorially, let's say This is where the customer is. Okay. Let's say here the raw material component. See, here he is showing what the sofa set, right? Now, to make this, you need some wood. You need some components made out of that wood. It comes to a manufacturing place which manufactures. Then it comes to a warehouse. Then you customize the product because maybe this guy wants a different upholstery, they wants a different color, they wants a different finish. Right. So you have a supplier of raw material component, a manufacturer, then you have a wholesaler, then you have a retailer, and then it reaches the customer. And there is an information flow across this whole thing. For the customer, it is only that he has placed the order to this guy, here to here. But there is the entire system of flow of information which ensures that all these that happen, customer product requirement, inventory status, point of sales data, etc., 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 master production schedule, everything happens backward. What you're seeing is only this. So this entire system is possible only because we have a very strong supply chain management and a very strong logistics support which delivers the requirement of the consumer. So this is an example of a basic supply chain. It applies to any product today. Okay. So supply chain management entails making decisions regarding the structure of the supply chain. The changes depends upon the product to product. Coordinating the movements of the goods and delivery of services. Sharing information between members of the supply chain. As I said, they all have to work in unison. They have to work closely together to ensure that the QCD across the entire supply chain is maintained. The factors in supply chain management, the SCM must consider the following trends. The improved capabilities, as I said, capabilities leading because of the demands of the customers and the realities that things can happen today. So customer expectations and competition is making that you deliver faster, cheaper, and better quality. Power has shifted to the consumer. Globalization, you can get from anywhere. Information technology, due to e-commerce, internet, electronic data exchange interface, internets, all that. Government regulations, trade barriers have reduced totally. The world, you have trade treaties from across many countries, and environmental issues to reduce waste. We talked about the sustainable development goals, which are followed by most good organizations. A typical supply chain is very simple: an external supplier, your internal functions, the external distributor. So you can have further distributors on this, there can be further suppliers on this side, and there is a constant flow of information across all these. Okay. All this today is possible because there is a backbone which has been created for electronic data interchange, which is a methodology for computer-to-computer linkages across the entire supply chain partners in a standardized format. In fact, many organizations do not now place orders in the physical format. Those earlier days, you used to type out a purchase order, send it by mail, and that person receives, looks at the mail, then acknowledges the order, all that kind of thing. None of that takes place today. The entire process is on the computer at zero time. So there is no time delay involved in any of the processes. They all happen on real time because of electronic data interchange. Quick transfer of information, reduced paperwork and administration, improved data accuracy. There is earlier some guy will place an order, the order will not be complete, this guy doesn't understand. Then there is a constant interchange of mails between the supplier and the vendor. Then finally they agree on something. In fact, even ISO 9000, there is a clause which talks about this. But now today, everything's that no longer it is there. Everything is on real time on electronic data interchange. So that is what makes life easy for most of us. And that in short is what is operations management today. That implies that there is an integrated supply chain management, that you have a whole supply management and integrating external suppliers through partnerships. So you no longer work as adversaries, you work through partnerships. So this is what makes an integrated one. So that's the end of today's course on basics of operations management. Of course, lot more could have been covered, but this gives you the flavor of what entails operations management. And those of you who want or will take this as an elective will be studying each one of these in detail. Okay, so I have finished here, unless now I'll throw open for any doubts, questions, and interactions. I have not met most of you people here. Let me go to the full screen. Let's have some interaction with whoever are around. Shreya Rai.
Yes, sir.
So at what point did you go to sleep?
So between 10 to 11.
Between?
10 to 11.
No, I said now during the presentation, when did you go to sleep and when did you get up?
So I did not sleep during the presentation. Huh? I did not sleep during the presentation.
Acha, you're not very good. Yeah, I would have gone to sleep, I was there. Let's see, Prachi, yes. Do you have any questions? Okay, let's have something. And if you ask questions, then I know that something you have, since you did not. Whatever be the doubt, you can. However basic it is, because this is again a basic course. So I'm sure you have some doubts. Especially if you are going to be an entrepreneur, right? Yeah.
So Actually, after attending the classes, basic
Yeah.
classes, I'm collecting a lot more questions for myself, and I'm getting the idea that I need to answer these questions to myself. Then only I can start a business. So that your class also helped me with that. That I could
Okay.
understand. Yes, sir.
Yeah, as I told you, this gives an overview of what is operations management, why operations management, what is the role of operations management. And, of course, management has many verticals. Each one is important. It is like a whole body, Like, let us say, operations management is like your system of digestive system, There is an input and there is an output, right? So a lot of things happen, and a lot of parts of the body which has to ensure that it transforms effectively. Okay, so that's important to understand. I have not seen, of course, Subir, I know, but I have not seen you today, Subir. And so, Dada, how are you?
Sir, I'm fine, sir.
What about, where is Hima? Yes, I have not seen. Shashikant, yes.
Yes, sir, present.
Titi Patel, I called you out earlier in the.
Sir, actually, I already informed in the group that I was in office. I attended.
Yeah.
Still,
No,
yes, sir.
sir told me, Neeraj sir
Yes,
told
sir.
me that you are in office, you will not be able to take the
Yes.
call. But now of course
Sir.
you can. Bushra,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Tripti Dubey, any questions?
No questions, sir.
What about Bushra? Okay, right.
Good evening, sir.
Uh,
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Bushra. Any questions?
No, sir, not as such.
Not as such. Means what? Otherwise, what do you do? You are a student? No.
Yes, sir. I'm an undergraduate student from sociology background.
In
From BHU.
BH,
Sociology, sir. Sociology.
sociology. What about Hima?
Sir, I'm a practicing chartered accountant.
Oh, yeah. I met you last time also, correct? No?
No, sir.
No. Acha, okay. Yeah. Right. Okay, so we end about 10 minutes early, so no problem. And Shreya, as I said, today is the last day, if you want to apply, that's it. Huh? Have
Yes,
you
sir,
gone
I'm
through that?
going.
Yes.
Yes, sir. I'm going to check that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Because the next program is only in 2024, incidentally.
Yes, sir.
So you have a deadline if you want to.
Yes, I'm going to check that out right after the class.
Right.
Thank you so
Okay.
much, sir.
Right. Okay. Good night. Wish you all the
Okay, sir,
best.
good night, sir.
So let's
Thank you,
see
sir.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you so much, sir.
Yes, off
Thank you
Wiedersehen
so much, sir.
till we meet again.
Thank you, sir.
Right. Okay. Bye.